Kiev and my city, like many other Ukrainian cities, are constantly being shelled by Russian rocket. And I would like to tell you one story of family from Kiev. After invasion started, they moved to another city in Dnipro to save their life to save the life of their child. But Russians hit the city as well, and their 4-year-old daughter Lisa died because there is no safe place anymore in Ukraine when you can hide from Russian rocket. And this dramatic time provides us opportunity to learn that there are a lot of things which have a high price, but there are things which are priceless. And freedom is one of such things. I would like to remind you how this war started, because this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, when Ukraine obtained the chance for the quick democratic transformations after collapse of the authoritarian regime due to revolution of dignity. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin started this war of aggression, occupied Crimea and part of Lugansk and Donetsk regions. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom, which has come closer to his own borders. And in this regard, there is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And Putin tried to convince the whole world that democracy, rule of law, human rights, and freedom are fake values because they couldn't protect you during the war. And we have to respond to this dimension, value dimension of this war. And in order to respond to it, we have to demonstrate justice, because only in such way we will be able to honestly say that, yes, it was a period of temporal law disorder when nothing worked, when you can't rely upon a legal instrument, but we fix it and we prove that rule of law is essential and justice is possible, even though delayed in time. So in my lecture, I want to focus on 3 categories. First is peace, second is justice, and third is international system. And then I will conclude with several words about our future. Why I will start with the peace? Because now we are in the middle of the war, which is a very bloody one. And Ukraine desires peace more than anyone else. But peace will not be achievable when the country which were invaded stop fighting and holds its defense. Because in such regard, it will be not peace, but occupation. And people who live in the occupied territories very well understand what does it means. Because Russia organized terror against people on occupied territories in order to save control over these territories. Russia deliberately exterminate active people in local communities, local mayors, local deputies, human rights defenders, journalists, priests, artists, volunteers, other active people of community. When Kiev region were liberated, we sent our mobile groups to Bucha, to Matviichuk, to Warzel, to Irpin, to other cities and settlements. And we were shocked. We found the dead civilians' bodies lay scattered around the streets until liberation. We found the same dead civilians' bodies in the gardens of their own households. We found torture chambers where the horrible torture was taking place. we found mass graves with unidentified civilians' bodies whose hands were tied under their back. And those of us who was there would never forget the smell. And I would like to illustrate what does it mean to live in occupation with a story of Volodymyr Vakulenko. He was found in the unmarked grave under the number 319. During Russian occupation, he disappeared. His family, to the last moment, hope that he is alive, and as many others, civilians, was in Russian captivity. And it was very hard to them to accept the result of identification. Volodymyr Vakulenko was a children writers. The whole generations of Ukrainian children were grow up on his daddy's book. He was killed only for his pro-Ukrainian position. Killed children writer Volodymyr Vakulenko for his pro-Ukrainian position. In Kherson, Russians killed musician and conductor Yuri Karpatenko because he refused to play in the concert with the organized. In Bucha, Russian killed Ruslan Nechiporenko and injured their son while they were searching for medicine and humanitarian assistance. There were no military necessity to kill all these people. Russians did it only because they could. And this shows us that peace is something, a state, which I can characterize as a freedom to live without fear and to have a long-term perspective. Therefore, I found myself, when the beginning of the large-scale invasion, in a very weird situation when I was asked how to contribute to people's survivals in the occupied territories. I had to answer, provide Ukraine with modern weaponry, because the whole UN system couldn't stop Russian atrocity there. And this is important also to understand that this claim, which said that Ukraine has stopped fighting and concentrated on peaceful negotiation with Russia, is not only wrong. Such claims is immoral, because I'm, as a human rights defender who have been documenting war crimes for 9 years already, perfectly knows that before large-scale invasion, the civilized world closed their eyes on what's going on in occupied territories, because it's much more easier not to notice the suffering of civilians there, but it's much more harder not to notice the struggle of people for the democracy and their freedom. And we, as Ukrainians, struggling for a freedom in all senses in this war, for a freedom to be a dependent country, but not Russian colony, for a freedom to be Ukrainians and preserve our Ukrainian identity and not to be re-educated as Russians, and for freedom to have our democratic choice, which was underlined by Revolution of Dignity, just for a chance to build our country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And this war has a very visible genocidal character. Putin, the senior political leadership, high military command, as well as Russian propagandists openly say that there is no Ukrainian state at all, that there is no Ukrainian people, that all of us are Russians. And then in multiple Russian channels, it's explained like this. that Ukrainians have to be either re-educated as Russians or killed. We also can see what's happened in the occupied territories, and we can see this process in dynamic because some Ukrainian territories, as Crimea and part of Lugansk and Donetsk region, are occupied for 9 years already. But even in new sieged by Russia Ukrainian territories, they impose the same policy of destroying Ukrainian identity. And they provide forcible deportations. They provide adoptions of Ukrainian children by Russian families in order to bring up them as Russians. They prohibited Ukrainian language, and you can be tortured and killed just for Ukrainian flag in your flat. And this is something we can't stop fighting, because if we stop fighting, there will be no more us. Second category, which I want to focus on, is category of justice. All this hell which we now face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity, which Russia enjoyed for decades, because Russian troops commit horrible war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Syria, in Libya, in other countries of the world. And they have never been punished for this. This violence and denial of human dignity became a part of Russian culture. Russians start to believe they can do whatever they wanted. It means that we must break the circle of impunity. We must stop it, not only for Ukrainians and for people who have already suffered from Russian brutality, but also for the other nations who can be potential a new target. And we face with accountability gap in this regard. What do I mean? This gap has two dimensions. The first dimension is that we live in a world where there is no international court for current moment who can prosecute Russia for the crime of aggression. Even the International Criminal Court have no jurisdiction over a crime of aggression in situation Russian war against Ukraine. It can't be solved on the level of the national courts because national courts can't overcome the immunity which top officials of each state have according to international law. So in order to fill this dimension of accountability gap, we have to establish a special tribunal on aggression and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other guilty in this crime accountable. People who initiated, planned, and started this war of aggression have to be punished. But there is another dimension of accountability gap, which is very familiar for me because I work directly with victims, with people who survived the hell. And I know for sure that they need to restore not only their broken lives, broken families, broken vision of the future, they need to restore their belief that justice is possible. And this is a huge problem for Ukraine because national system is overloaded with an extreme amount of crimes. International Criminal Court will limit its investigation only to several selected cases. And this is a question on the table. Who will provide justice for the hundreds of thousands of victims of this war? And this is a very important question for me because we documented war crimes not only for national archives. We documented war crimes because we believe that sooner or later, people who committed these crimes by their own hands, as well as Putin and his surrounding, have to be brought to justice. When large-scale invasion started, we united our efforts with dozens of organizations, mostly regional ones, into Tribunal for Putin initiative. We have an ambitious goal to record each criminal episode which was committed in the smallest village in each oblast of Ukraine. We built the all-Ukrainian network of local documentators who work on the ground, gather testimonies of victims and witness. When something happened, local documentators can come to the place and make their own photo, video, and brief description. We sent mobile groups to work on the occupied territories. We analyze open data because we live in digital era, and each person with a smartphone can have central for future investigation, photos and videos. And sooner or later, some of these photos and videos will be in our hands. Working together only for the 10 months of large-scale invasion, we jointly documented more than 31,000 of war crimes. 31,000, it's an enormous amount, but it's only a tip of iceberg. And I ask myself, for whom do we document all these crimes for, if I know that national system is overloaded and International Criminal Court will select only several cases. And in order to achieve justice, we have to change the global approach to the war crime justice. That's why our fight for justice will have an impact to the other people in other countries who also suffered from the wars or authoritarian regimes. In order to achieve this goal, we have to overcome our prejudice. And the first prejudice, it's our thinking. We still look into this world through the prism of Nuremberg trial. In past century, the civilized world made a significant step to establish law and justice, and Nuremberg trial was organized, and Nazi war criminals were tried, but only after Nazi regime had collapsed. But we live in a new century. Justice must be independent of the magnitude of Putin regime's power. We cannot wait. We have to establish international tribunal now and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other Russian war criminals accountable. We must move further. And this is the first prejudice, because when I speak with politicians from different countries, they always think that justice will be when the war will end. But why we have to wait? If international crimes is committed now, we have to start legal procedures now to respond to these crimes. It's not only punishment for committing crimes, it's also prevention. Because the perpetrators, they are totally confident that they will remain unpunished. And this even starting procedure of organizing of international tribunal can have a cooling effect to the brutality of human rights violations which Russians commit in Ukraine every day. Because even if some part of Russian soldiers start to think that, okay, but we know from the history that authoritarian regime had collapsed and people who think the same untouchable can be appeared under the court, and maybe I myself have to respond to everything what I committed by my own hands. Only this doubt can provide the cooling effect. And situation of war, it means that it can save people's lives. And second prejudice, which I observe for current moment, that civilized worlds taken as a sad norma that during the wars there are multiple human pain. And it's sad, but it's a tradition that majority of victims remained without chance for justice, and only selected categories of people or type of crimes will be prosecuted. And this is a very wrong in 21st century to have such way of thinking. The war turned people into the numbers, and I notice by myself that I start to speak more with numbers than with names, because the scale of war crimes grows so large that it's become impossible to recognize all the stories. But I want to tell you one. This is a story of 62-year-old civilian Oleksandra, who was killed by Russian soldiers immediately after invasion near his home. This tragedy received a huge media attention only because it was a first court trial. In the court, his wife, Katerina, told that her husband was an ordinary farmer, but he was her whole universe. And now she lost everything. And this is a key meaning of justice, because when war turned people into the numbers, only justice can return people their names, which mean their human dignity. And that's why in 21st century, when we have digital technologies which provide us opportunities for documentation and for identification of perpetrators, which we can't even dream 15 years before, we have to find a way how to provide justice for all victims of this war, regardless who they are, what their social position, what type of crimes and level of cruelty they endured, and whether or not is media is interested in their case or international organization mention their case in their reports. We must return people their names, because life of each person matters. And when we speak about this, we can't limit it, our fight for justice, only by crime of aggression. We, in addition to establishing a special tribunal on aggression, we must establish a hybrid mechanism inside national system of Ukraine as a model where national judges work together with international judges, national prosecutors work together with international prosecutors. It's like a vaccine to national system to provide national system the possibility to effectively investigate and prosecute dozens of thousands of criminal proceedings. Without this, we will not break the circle of impunity. Because, as I told before, it's part of Russian culture. And when the relatives of this Russian soldier who killed Oleksandr Shelepov was asked by journalists how they estimate the fact that his son killed civilians, unarmed civilians during the war, they responded, but this is a war. Civilians can be killed during the war. So in order to counteract this way of thinking, we have to demonstrate justice. Because the problem is that our database with 31,000 collecting episodes of war crimes throughout the country convincingly proves that Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia instrumentalized the pain. It's the way how Russians try to win this war. They try to break people's resistance and occupy Ukraine by the immense suffering of the civilian population. And I always tell that we not just document Geneva and Hague Convention's violations. We document human pain, and we must stop it. And third categories, which I want to focus, it's about international system. We live in a very dangerous world where the international system of peace and security isn't functioning. The permanent member of Security Council of UN started the war of aggression 9 years ago, extended it to a large-scale invasion 1 year ago, and the entire UN system couldn't stop Russian atrocities. When Secretary General of UN came to Kiev to visit President Zelensky, at the same day, the Russian rocket hit residential buildings and killed in their own flat our colleague, journalist Vera Goric. So it's very dangerous to live in such world, not only for Ukrainians, but to the all people in different countries, because Ukraine is a vivid example that your guarantee for human rights and your security depend not on international law or international order, but whether or not you are lucky to live in a country with a strong military potential or nuclear weapon. And if this logic will ingrained in mind of people, it will lead to very negative consequences, because it means that government in future in different countries will invest money not in science, education, healthcare, social program, developing of local communities, or solving challenging problems like climate change, inequality, poverty, etc. But they will invest money in the weapons. And with all modern technologies, it will be apocalyptic scenario. So we must restore international order, and we must fix the situation. And we have to start the entire reform of international system of peace and security with a small but important step to exclude Russia from Security Council of UN for the constant violation of UN statute. And this is a task for all of us, because we have to build international system which can effectively protect people around the globe against wars and authoritarian regimes. And if it happens, if such reforms will start in, maybe it will be the only one positive impact from this horrible war which we now facing. And several words about the future. It's very difficult to live during the wartime. And we experienced the numerous deaths in the battlefield, in the deep rear, in occupied territories. And I would never wish any nation to go through our experience, because war is something inhuman. But these dramatic times provide us the opportunity to express our best features, to be better than we are, to fight for freedom, to be courageous, to make tough but right choices, to bring responsibility, to help each other. And now, like never before, we are acutely aware of what does it mean to be human beings. And I observe it on my own eyes when, after large-scale invasion, international organizations evacuated their personnel, the ordinary people remained, and ordinary people started to do extraordinary things. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who helped others to survive under artillery fire. It were ordinary people who broke encirclement to provide humanitarian aid. It were ordinary people who rescued their life but helped trapped in the in the rubbles of residential buildings. And this is something which provides me with optimism to looking in the future. I don't see this future easy. It will be difficult, but when you are fighting for freedom, when you are fighting for human dignity, you are fighting for something which has no limitation in national borders. And I would like to use this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to people in different countries who support Ukrainians in our fight for freedom and for human dignity. I know that everything which we documented is very understandable for each people in the world, because human pain has no national borders as well. And when I tell the stories of pain of mother who lost her newborn child, the tragedy is understandable to each person, regardless of their nationality, citizenship, social position, political views, ideology, religion, color of skin, and others. Because first and foremost, we are all human beings, and we have to support the fight for freedom, each other, because we live in a very interconnected world, and the only spread of freedom make our world safer. I will stop on this, and I will be glad to answer to your question. Thank you.